I was watching coverage of the Mexican presidential election yesterday, and as has widely been reported now, the winner is Juan Lopez Obrador, 64 years old, and he's a socialist, um, widely known as AMLO, as a sort of affectionate nickname. Now, this was a very strong victory. I understand he secured a landslide, and it's interesting that his opponents were so quick to concede defeat. Um, Election night itself was described as relatively trouble free, but that is tipping off an election, or rounding off an election, I should say, in which 132 candidates and campaign workers have been murdered. That's staggering. Even by Mexican standards, that sounds really horrendous. What I thought of was I recall how big a story it was when Joe Cox was murdered here in the UK, the Labour MP, 2 years ago. That was understandably a big story because that sort of political violence is very rare in this country. So I can imagine that 130 times over. I've just watched a Vice News segment which kind of followed one candidate, and of course he was using all the right language. He wanted to stand up for people. He came from humble background, and he welcomed investigations into the fact that opponents had accused him of corruption. Um, and basically, the segment showed him traveling around. I forget which state it was, but he had several vehicles and exotic pets, and it did look a bit shifty, but we don't know. And the problem is, in Mexico, I think for political candidates is one of two things. It's either they are corrupt and they've got links to the cartels who are funding them, as an archbishop said, who was quoted in the segment. They're their godfathers. They fund the campaigns. On the other hand, could have decent, brave Mexican citizens who are trying to stand up for their community, and they know that there's dangers involved. I do think there are a lot of small town politicians in Mexico are very brave people, um, because they stand up to these vicious gangs. And let's make no mistake about it, these cartels, I've probably said it before in another video, but I believe this, they are, in my opinion, as evil as ISIS. They're just what they do, the callousness, the depravity, the complete desensitization to human life, the misery that they cause, is profound. Now, President-elect Obrador, I'm not sure when the specific inauguration would be. Um, his victory is significant because he's the first left-leaning president in decades in Mexico. I done a bit of research yesterday just to familiarize myself. My knowledge of Mexican politics is so. It's not great. I understand the conservative PRI party was in power continuously from 1929 to 2000, a bit like the dominance of the Liberal Democratic Party in Japan. However, unlike Japan, it's a history of serious political violence. And um, after 2000, things started changing. I don't know if any PRI presidents have been elected since then, but certainly the last few presidents have all been conservatives. Enrique Pena Nieto, who leaves office with very low approval ratings. Felipe Calderon before that. Vicente Fox, Ernesto Cedillo, and going back. Now, the drug war, this current drug war, began under the Calderon administration in the end of 2006. And from the end of 2006 to present, um, whatever source you use, that drug war has cost over 100,000 lives. I think in the case of determining which of those deaths are directly linked to the drug war, i.e., the war with the cartels, between the government and the cartels, or from cartel violence, versus, let's say, regular homicides. Let's say someone has an argument with their neighbor and they kill them, or a murder from domestic violence or something like that. Now, those deaths wouldn't be part of the drug war. So some sources would suggest a certain figure, another source would suggest another figure for a particular year. So, for example, 2017 was described as one of the most violent years in Mexico in recent decades, with 25,000 homicides. Um, and yet, the Wikipedia article for ongoing conflicts quotes, I think, it's 14,000 homicides. Either way, that's a lot of people, but it's quite a big discrepancy. So that makes me think, well, how many of these are directly linked to the drug war and how many are just standard? I mean, every murder is terrible, but it is important to differentiate between murders that are part of a political conflict versus murders that are murders that would happen in a standard crime situation. I think that's very important when determining the numbers for the Mexican drug war. But nevertheless, whatever way we look at it, it's been extremely costly. In fact, it would rank as one of the deadliest conflicts of this whole decade. Um, it's up there, not quite on level with Syria, but it's certainly costly. If you look at the ongoing conflict section of Wikipedia, that's very striking, and it really gives an indication of the world's trouble spots and where where these sort of situations are happening and the sort of figures that are being used, which can be contentious. Having said that, Mexico is a big country, and there is quite a lot of difference between the states. The level of violence between the states. But anyway, what I'm driving at is clearly this is going to be in my opinion, the number one priority for President Obrador, is reducing the violence from this drug war. I don't think in a country of 120 million people you're ever going to have a situation where there isn't some degree of violence and some degree of violent crime, especially when there is such a deeply entrenched history of it. Mexico has had a very violent history from the War of Independence in 1810 to 1821, to various conflicts in the mid 19th century, the very costly Mexican Revolution, which had 1 to 2 million fatalities, and going into the 20th century, the Cristero War of 1926 to 1929. So there is a long history of political violence, and I'm not saying that as a smear against Mexico. A lot of countries have that. It's not like I don't mean that to be insulting. It's just a statement of fact. But Mexico's a great country. I'm really interested in Mexican culture, and I hope that this man will be the best choice for Mexicans. It is good that there has been conciliatory tones. It is good that his rivals have conceded so quickly. It is good that election night itself has been trouble free. Apparently, he had a half-hour phone call with Trump, which was seen as constructive. Now, that's very interesting when you have a right-wing populist president in the United States and a left-wing populist president-elect in Mexico. Um, they're not exactly tied to be, you wouldn't expect them to be working partners, but in a sense, they are both populists, so I suppose they have that in common. Um, I mean, this guy ranks Jeremy Corbyn among his friends, so that's saying something. But it is interesting. Apparently, he has offered President Trump to do his part and reduce the number of Mexican immigrants to the United States in return for assistance. So, whether that means um, assistance because Mexico is still a somewhat developing country, or I'm not sure exactly what that means. Definitely, the war in corruption is going to be a major challenge. A lot of world leaders have to grapple with this, and it's no easy thing because it's like a puzzle inside a maze inside an enigma. Where do you start? If for example you have an entire police department that is corrupt, where do you start? So I certainly don't envy the challenges that he faces. Um, Trade is very important, and I mentioned populism. Apparently, Obrador has also spoken out against NAFTA. That's something else he has in common with Trump. So the relations between Obrador and Trump might surprise people and might get on better than people think. Let's hope so, because obviously it's a very important relationship, Mexico and the United States. There isn't too much more to say. I just hope that Mr. Obrador does reach out, and he is a president for all Mexicans, because the worst case scenario would be if he is another Hugo Chavez. My gut feeling is he won't be. I don't know that much about him, but I think you'd be insane. Even left wing leaders would be insane to try and copy the Bolivarian socialism model of Venezuela, because, as we all know, Venezuela is a failed state now. It's a disaster. And it's tragic to see this preventable disaster happening, Venezuelan people literally starving. And I think there's an acute realization around Latin America that they don't want to replicate that. Perhaps a better comparison is with Brazil's Lula da Silva, who was a very popular president, but now, of course, is jailed on corruption charges. So, rhetoric is one thing, action is another. Ultimately, it's up to the Mexican people, of course, the future of their country. But I hope, for the sake of North American stability, that President Obrador can reach out. I hope that US Mexican relations will improve. And I think it will take effort from both sides. It will take effort from Trump to moderate his language and deal with some of the, I mean, separating families, whatever way you look at it. I think that was very bad PR, and I think even Trump recognized that. On the other hand, Mexico has to understand the US argument as well. It has to, it has to work both ways. Mexico has to understand that Americans don't want, whilst there are many legitimate immigrants, there are there are cartels get over the border and cause misery in border states. So of course, it's not about scapegoating all immigrants. Of course, the vast majority have nothing to do with cartels. And there's a world of difference between someone who crosses illegally, maybe they shouldn't do it, but someone who crosses illegally and a vicious gang member. So it is important that Trump is very clear that he differentiates between the two. Um, but I think both sides need to work to be respectful of the concerns on both sides. So yes, Trump has to understand Mexican sensitivities regarding how they feel people are being treated. On the other hand, Mexico has to appreciate that, not all the pressure could be put on America. Mexico also has a responsibility to deal with immigration. So, yeah, I think that's the best way forward. I'm an outsider, but like I say, I'm very interested in Mexican culture, and I just hope this is positive future. Time will tell. Thanks for watching.